October 10th, 2020. I'm in flashbacks, and they're not all bad, but some are all the way back to my childhood. I can't wake up in the daytime. I seem to be awake all night, and then I sleep all day. So it's fall, and we're having some beautiful weather, and I'm not able to get outside, and I'm not well enough to retype this. But I wrote a novel back when I had no memory of myself. And what I wrote it from was the dreams that I had as a child. That I wasn't from this planet. That I had been sent here from the planet Iblis. I-B-L-I-S. Yes, I even had a name for it. I would see in pictures names. And she was sent here to save humans from creating a terrible disease, which I had as a child, that was spreading genetic mutation to the brains of children on this planet Earth. And needless to say, the beings from the planet Iblis had technology advanced beyond our own. And it was the decision of the Creator that the humans on Earth should not be completely extinguished. Now, all of this is fantasy, all right? It is science fiction. But the research and the quest that I went on to understand this dream of mine actually is science. And I've since proved the science to be true in my own autobiography. And I was going to throw out this science fiction novel, but I've nothing better to do, and I'm not well enough to retype the thing, and even if I did, it would go on Google Docs, and Google Docs would put it on Facebook, and Facebook, when I die, would delete everything. So I decided to put this up on YouTube. Now, I don't know if YouTube will allow me the kind of hours involved in 200 pages, but I'm going to give it a shot, and we'll see where we go from there. I think what I will do is I will do it in 3-hour chapters. And the first one, if it doesn't get uploaded, then I'll redo it in 1-hour chapters. But I'm going to figure out a way. I'm going to get it up there anyway. Now, her name is Mara, M-A-R-A, Nalim, N-A-L-I-N, Nalim. She came from beyond the Earth's galaxies, and how she traveled through space and time she does not know. It is the spring of 1649 at the Boyle Castle, Lancashire, England. It is under siege by Cromwell's renegades. Women are being burned at the stake, children mutilated, and men murdered just for the sheer pleasure of it. Oh yes, the humans were indeed extremely barbaric. Although attractive in an odd sort of way, Mara's paranormal ability had managed to subdue many a despot until now. But the brutal depravity she had witnessed at the tender age of 20 had left its mark on the slender, tall woman of mysterious birth. Mara Nalim was jaded by the depravity surrounding her. The tarnish of life showed in the lack of luster in her hazel eyes. Rebellion against doctors, religion, and politics had made her few friends and dangerous enemies. Not even Sir Boyle, England's richest man, a billionaire, could save her now. "I've been poisoned," the thought struck suddenly like a bolt of lightning. The sudden awakening of truth held her in a vice grip of fear. She tried to scream, panic-stricken, but discovered she was paralyzed and could not move. She felt wet. Either her bladder had burst trying to move, or she was lying in a pool of her own blood, which she could not be sure. Staring around the cold, damp surroundings, she recognized it was a hospital near Oxford. How she got there was a mystery. She was in shock. Shivers of fear momentarily gave her back her voice. Her scream sounded like the pitch of metal on metal. Tears welled in her eyes, sobbing. She desperately tried to sit up on the bed. Her eyes fixed on a crucifix on the wall at the foot of the bed. Light from the hall seemed to sparkle in her eyes. If I meditate with Yeva's principles, focus on the light, perhaps I can bring my heart rate down. Slow down, breathe and hold. It will slow the effects of the poison. Live through the night. Until morning, there must be a way to escape. I must find a way in the morning. Thoughts scrambled, moving through her fear like frenzied seagulls. The light bore holes into her eyes. The pain she felt was that sharp. Holding on to the light firmly, she toyed with its beam into the darkness, shadowing against the walls. A patient scream echoed from somewhere. Myra's thoughts suddenly fueled by the dim memory of her friend, Robert Templeton. Templeman. He had been the one great love of her celibate life, and she relived the hours before his ghoulish death, decapitated by a drunken renegade, drunk with wine and his power to mutilate anyone who dared defend her. Robert's face loomed in the darkness, translucent skin stretched off massive cheekbones. Drawing back in a grimace of horror, another face glared at her, twisting in demonic laughter. It was Bishop Brian Lynch. Eyes glared back at her in ice-cold, callous apathy. It was Dr. Keene, Lynch's accomplice in the crime to murder the woman who had dared to speak out against medical atrocities. Her mouth hung open in the dark. She hears herself screaming, but the air is silent. The moonlit night is still. No sound comes from her mouth. Then creeping awareness seeps into her catatonic brain. Her heartbeat began to race. She wanted to run, but to where? A drum beats in her ears as the faces loomed in on her. Gigantic, distorted faces glimmered in the darkness overhead, all of them staring as if accusing her. "It is your own misbegotten justice," they seemed to be shouting. "You had been warned that exposing medical crimes would cost you your life. Now you shall pay the price." Accusations ring in her ears, and then the sounds turn to the screams of agony. Yet it was her own voice of anguish she heard. Searing pain sliced inside her brain, down her left arm, through her spine, and shot up into her heaving breasts. She could feel herself sinking. Am I going unconscious? All at once, the faces changed into those of children zooming past her eyes. Billions of children's faces filled the dark, moving in on her closer and closer. Their screams echoed throughout the globe, filled the universe. Their cries came to a climax, louder and louder, until she felt herself drifting in an explosion of light. Heat engulfed her body. Flames burned inside her mind as if consumed her very soul. Esther was right, she thought. Tonight I shall die, and my science research will die with me. But what of Robert's prophecy on the day of his death? He said I would succeed. He warned me they would try to kill me, but I was stubborn and naive. It was all my fault. Yes, it is all true. Nightmarish visions of past, present, and humanoid future. Her mother on the planet Iblis, King Charles II on the run, and New York, which she had never yet seen. New York, to which her father had fled in 1636, fighting for freedom from French and British demigods. Her spirit at that moment disembodied as she traveled inside the bodies of millions of dying American children and felt their agony. Mara slowly gazed out the high window at a wild northern landscape when it was as if the sun's light from the other side of the globe flashed into her grief-stricken eyes. Then it happened. She saw the children of her past and the children in the 20th century. She saw nearby somewhere a horrible vision. The entire community had totally ignored the suffering of their children, born with genetic brain damage from chemical poisoning. King Charles was the first in England to blame mining and industrial smelting for the new diseases inflicting his people. Had he been right? He had first begun his suspicions against the doctors when he was just 9 years old. Perhaps King Charles is a genius, as Robert Boyle Jr. had claimed. Suddenly a man dressed in white emerged, empowered by the others. He was killing female babies, bloodletting, a Christian zealot performing a maniacal Last Supper. He stood before a long oak table holding up a screaming naked female child. "This is of my flesh," he roared as his penis became enlarged. Demented, the others bowed in reverence. He was their god, and they envied his maniacal, engorged cock. Hanging by its tiny feet, the baby flayed, wailing her scream onto deaf ears. He then slit her throat. Transported back into a more familiar time, Mara saw her grandfather, Nalim-Traherne in France, cut the jugular vein on her favorite calf. It was something she had witnessed as a child. In the next instant, she watched the homicidal man in white reappear, dressed as the reborn Christ. "Drink, this is my blood." While the blood spurts from the tiny baby, shooting its blood, as if her throat was the fountain of longevity and rejuvenation. A weeping woman nearby caught the baby's blood in a bowl. She was no doubt the child's mother. A dozen women then gathered round as each one poured drops of blood into a chalice. Mara saw the men sitting round the table grinning ugly with anticipation. Mara gagged as the men drank from the bloody chalice, passing the cup to each man, who then washed it down with their homemade blood-red wine. Mara winced, trying to block the vision off, but the picture was just as clear with her eyes closed. The men then in a drunken binge raped all the women, children as well, both boys and girls. By this time the women became drunk and raped their sons by sucking off the blood and the shit from their puny cocks. Mara prayed that the disease from anal fecus's bacteria kill the whole of them off. Finally, the orgy was over, and she watched them bury the mutilated bodies of their sacrificial babies. They were scattered throughout the fields, under bushes hidden in wilderness. Memories of herself wandering the hills of Spain as a child, sensing even then that there were dead babies' bodies scattered in the hills. Had this depravity been so rampant throughout human history, she wondered? But yes, of course it had. She'd always known that. Silently, Mara Nalim prayed to focus her Yavika meditation, to let her mind fly. Slowly the vision began to rise. It shimmered, projecting her dying carcass. She is ready to die. She would rather die than remain here on this disgusting planet Earth. Just then a profound sensation of love invades her heart. Unborn children cry out from centuries into the future. "Mara, you must not die. We need you." She wept as they sang a song of praise to her. The singing children assured her they were safe. They sang that her life had not been a waste. They clapped danced and giggled with gleeful delight. 2,200 we shall become of you, be born disease-free. We shall not give up hope, for then we shall not see. It was then a moment later that Sister Brunhilde entered her room while Mara was still in a trance. She smuggled in water for Mara to drink. Lifting Mara's limp head to drink, the nun whispered, "You don't belong in this ward. No one has the right to deny you safe, clean water." Mara as yet could not speak, but gulped water down, grateful, listening silently to the nun's rhetoric. "I could get expelled or worse. Bishop Lynch is insane and trying to kill you." Was this meeting mere chance? Lucky for you that Sister Brunhilde had traveled from Germany to meet the bishops in a futile effort to free her healing order of nuns from confinement. The Pope had issued decrees that would eventually remove all healing nuns from insisting peasants to be incarcerated within prison castles, calling them convents. The German and French king were so far dependent upon her great skills, but the situation in England was precarious at best. If it should become known she befriended Mara, she would be killed. As the nun nervously explained, Mara is well aware now of those diabolical conditions. Mara nods her head, grateful, but knowing she is far out of danger. Somehow, before morning, I must find a way to escape. Sister Brunhilde agreed, saying it was hopeless. Had heard of her research and believed Mara was on earth by God's destiny, and prayed to what she thought was God. Suddenly the nun disappeared. It was then Mara realized she was hallucinating, alone, and dying. Chapter 1. The sun had set like dripping blood pouring into the ocean. A morning mist streamed, rising heavily over the secluded cliff. A pale greenish vapor clung to her golden satin gown, its lace petticoat billowing in the wind. As the wind picks up speed, her skirts flew up, revealing naked, slender limbs. From above the treetops to the north, a blue stream of light behind the young woman moved slowly toward her. The emerald fog thickens, yet on the horizon the sun shone like an explosion of color, and even though Mara was struck by the bright beam, demonic thoughts emerging from the shadowy dark regions of her brain, she knew the bright beam was God's goodwill. So much so, she froze for a moment or two at the cliff's edge, gazing with difficulty. Her eyes were slits in her attractive, sculptured features. A tall, slim girl grimaced in pain as her long midnight tresses slapped against her cheeks and eyelids. Stifling phlegm caught in her throat as she fought back tears. She hated being sick. She hated the humiliation it wrought, and coughed it up and spits out the vile-tasting yellowish gobs. Her gaze swept across the rocky incline just as a little chipmunk crept out of its nearby hole. The chipmunk stood soppy, wet, and shivering, blinking at her. Reaching into her skirt pockets, Mara threw it a hunk of bread, and grinning with pleasure as it jumped and caught the white clump midstream. It stuffed the whole piece into its little mouth. Swollen cheeks chomped rapidly. Mara threw another chunk. The chipmunk leaped, grabbed, chewed, and then crept closer. She smiled as it scurried away with the prized chestnut bulging in its right cheek. She laughed. It was in a moment like this that she would forget pain. It was moments like this that brought her dismal feelings to a halt and gave her delight. She had never enjoyed the company of men with as much pleasure. The little fetching creatures of the forest stirred past her often melancholy eyes that would turn to fire in a blazing passion. A hawk swooped down her nerves, and muscles braced for a fight. The little chipmunk snapped its head around just as a sharp beak bit into its neck. Blood gushed, and instantly he was caught. The hawk began to devour its victim, ripping strips of warm flesh, while a dying heart was still beating. Mara felt a sense of deepening isolation, abandonment, discarded, best described her despair, yet it seemed to sharpen her senses. The Shetland pony coughed as she impulsively screamed, crying into the wind and olivine fog. Born in Germany, raised in France, and educated in England, she swore in 3 languages. Mein God, you effing swine, show yourself or I will kill myself. Her heartbeat raced, then felt lighter. A ferocious wind began to spin. All around her the landscape transformed into a pale blue beam. The trees turned the color of iridescent seashells. The silence was beautiful, unearthly, had convinced her that she was alone at first. The great silver saucer rearing toward her from out of the clouds seemed to be merely an illusion of the early morning fog. A distant hum echoed in her ears when she realized something massive indeed was approaching. As if on cue, a paranormal, picturesque procession passed within inches of her, a planet on fire, a galactic evacuation, the men and women of space and human evolution, all of creation, the very nature of God of the universe itself. Slowly her entire human history unfolded before her horrified eyes. In this moment, the true origin of her celestial parents became clear, seeing it all in flashback visions, as if she was there in person. The visions swarmed thicker, larger, in 3-dimensional realism. Her comely face pales as his sea-green eyes flicker in her direction. Today is her 23rd birthday, and Esther would be worried. She should leave, but she couldn't move. For a moment, she thought she must be still sleeping, unable to move, but there was nothing she could do. A man not of this earth altered his gaze slightly, and Mara saw a flash of his long, wavy red hair the color of fire. A celestial male being floated toward her. His sleek, tall frame came into her view. Sinewy muscles sprinted toward her with the speed of a panther. The handsome man stopped suddenly, almost touching her. He is so tall, she thought, as tall as any cathedral pillar, at least 6'4" she calculates. Stunned by his beauty, she followed, mesmerized as he beckoned her. She watched the visions exploding before her eyes, feeling their urgency, and smelled the acrid stench of death. Despite the sensation of fear, she felt euphoric. Something about this magnificent man excited her beyond his handsome physique, which was well exposed by his strange form-fitting suit. It was white shimmering silk that was contrasted by his shoulder-length flaming hair, which waved its way down from a high forehead. A full mouth smiled, setting off his perfect white teeth in a face near as young as her own. Around his neck, breathtaking jewels hung, dazzling her. Her body tingled, terrified, lured by her own burning desire. A voice echoed and called her name. "Welcome, Mara Nalim-Traherne." Just as she entered the opening of the sphere, she is surrounded by others she cannot visualize, blinded by their illuminating light. Finally, she is led down into the core in the center, which was to be her destination. Shivering with anticipation, the lighted figures turned brilliant strawberry, and then the visions engulfed her mind, body, and soul. Drifting from life to life, Mara Nalim-Traherne, the reincarnated shaman queen, part human, part not of this earth, grasped at once the madness of her human insanity. Her soul blended with theirs in one vast ecstasy that made the damnation of her quest worth living for eternity. She stood there, remembering the visions, genetic humanoid history, past, present, and future. Through celestial intervention from beyond her galaxy, she is destined to dedicate her life in the quest to the discovery of her lifelong illness. By their special powers, she survived crippling disease, despite the agony of it all. Longing for the peace of death, despair would overtake her over and over. She had tried to die, yet survived. She abruptly was given the power for the very meaning of all life itself. Mara instinctively knew, yet still the memories were confused, fragmented, jigsaw pieces, disjointed, surviving from life to life, reborn without original genetic memory. Then always at maturity, the visions would start. Each time the olivine fog, the mist, followed by a blue light being. Knowing that the answer to her quest would never be revealed without great torture to herself, she dropped to her knees before him as if he were God. Rise, he held out his hand to hers. Desperately weak, she clutched it. His warm flesh sent a current of bliss coursing through her being. In a meek voice, Mara whispered, "Who are you, sire, if not God?" Laughter echoes. Then a rich, melodic tone replied, "King Caradoc de la Trahan, captain of this vessel from the planet Iblis, cousin to your great father." Mara pleads, "Please, I beg you for guidance in these savage hours that will lay before me." He smiled, "In God's time, my precious lady, it shall be done. You shall resume the research of your ancestors. In 353 years it will be over." "Yes, I see," she said, "but I didn't really thinking. This be the year 1652 plus 353 equals 2005. He grunts. "Mara, concentrate. Focus your mind." A stern voice interrupted her thoughts. Too afraid to disobey, she looked again to the vast monitor, watching the destruction of such a perfect thing as the human species. She watched as the children self-destructed before reaching puberty. Covering her eyes, wiping away the tears, she gazed once more to another world, another time. Humans were horribly disfigured, plunging into depraved insanity, hissing at each other like crippled vipers. Mara froze in fear, then with disgust. "Why must I be the one?" She screamed as her pity turned into rage. Compassionately he said, "Your reward is their punishment." "I don't understand," she whimpered, then stood erect, regaining her false pride. "You will. Continue the study," King Caradoc commanded. During her burst of fury, she had moved to the window, staring out at the universe. He had followed and stood behind her. Turning, she gazed up into his eyes. Twin pools of sea-green apex held her spellbound. Gazing at the very tall, exquisite man, he gave her a nodding smile. A brief, eclectic moment ignites between them. Then, sighing in resignation, she began to waltz. He grinned, watching her. She would prove an amusing pupil. Sorry about that. My computer will go in and out periodically. Yes, she began to waltz to music that she heard from inside her brain. He grinned, watching her. Golden skirts flew in her long, sweeping dancer strides across the soaring spaceship. Then she stops in front of the wall-sized screen, turning to glare at Caradoc. Haughtily, she flipped her long, dark hair from across her heaving breasts. Midnight tresses cascade halfway down her back. Spinning around, she turned back to the massive screen monitor. While concentrating, she sucks her tongue that partially protrudes from her small and full pouting mouth. Hazel eyes gleamed out from behind her fair eyelashes, unusual against the backdrop of thick black hair. She is attractive, he mused. Having no choice, Mara Nalim-Traherne wriggled her Grecian nose and resumed the full subconscious focus of her supreme cosmic power. Methuselah, my son, lived to 996, but before the beginning of human time, Mars will burn to a crisp, and its people would perish. This is the planet Iblis from whence your mother came. The picture looked familiar and similar to Earth, except it had 300 times the amount of hardwood forest, and its location 1,000 light years from Mars. Absence of death by disease and magnificent technology. Vehicles ran on a blanket of air. There were no highways needed, and fuel was uranium the size of a teaspoon enclosed in a capsule that seemed to last forever. Pollution was not unheard of. Accidents happened, but seldom became a problem. Plush valleys, clean oceans, non-violence. The difference on Iblis were subtle. At first glance, they were nothing like humans, hardly noticeable. Then the viewing screen scanned the people, and it was obviously that their bodies were only similar. They were vessels of physical excellence and beauty, their telepathic powers, pure magic. They did not speak in language. Voices were instruments of music. Thoughts were communications. Unselfish disciplines made them beyond any intelligence level of human imagination. By the age of 3, they were superior in every way, and disease was prevented and controlled through diet and lifestyle. Their average lifespan was 1,000 years. No one breed children without a license from the Universal Council, representing 321 galaxies. All population were strictly controlled. Mara gasped, "This is where my mother was born?" "Yes. Here she is getting ready to travel to Earth. A young woman, exquisite, classic features, tall, slim, dancing. No wonder I dance so well," Mara thought. Hair that is midnight blue-black falls into natural curling ringlets. A green-eyed Serena smiled. The date was 1650 BC. Her dance was similar to Spanish and Arabic, referred to often as the belly dance. Then she laughed, gazing into the screen, waving. Tears welled in Mara's eyes. "My mother. 1650 before Christ, but how? Artificial insemination." He stopped bellowing, but another time. Mara began to argue when he grabbed her arm, saying, "There is no time." Chapter 2. An Iblis spaceship that cannot be seen. In twilight hours, a mysterious opaline fog surrounds the castle. Inside the mist, a silver saucer hovers outside Mara's bedroom balcony. Mara is drowsy but finds herself back on the ship. If there was any other way, Caradoc apologizes, you'd still be asleep. But we are running out of time. You're going to need all the strength you can muster before this night is over. I understand. Mara is tired, but grasps the urgency. Relax. Dream. Dream of the world you hope for. Dream of your Creator and the universe. As he spoke, Mara's eyelids flutter, then close. Breathing slowed to that of profound peace. Caradoc smiled. She was a good subject once she got past her mood swings. Instantly her eyes opened, blazing with new life, as a mist of luminescent fog embraced her being. The lighted ones had formed a meditation circle to give her greater mind power. Now for more scientific information. She spent several hours devouring science that are on a visual screen, speed reading volumes by the minute. Tom retired to his lab. If this ritual did not work, if it didn't, the humans of Earth were doomed. Tom was one of the scientists on the ship. And that meant the universe as well. If only Tom could find the answer in the Iblis tapes. Mara turned away weeping, gripped by her growing awareness and grief. The sheer beauty of love on the planet Iblis had eluded her, then cries, "What folly life is! I wish I were dead." As she bursts into painful sobs, the lights turned purple. Caradoc rushed over the soft cream Caradoc rushed over with soft cream to wipe her face. Delicately he wipes it with a soft sheer cloth, tenderly removing the smeared makeup that had been made popular during her years in France. "I suggest you stop wearing makeup for a while." He dabbed anti-infection oils to her swollen eyes. They blurred as he bathed them in distilled water, then poured out from a silver tank behind his desk. Makeup had run into her eyes. They would infect. Her immune system had waned from the overload and the pressure. She sat silent, waiting for the next step, knowing the white light would be applied to her temples. "Must I never be allowed to remember you on Earth? You know then what that does." "Yes, I know. I don't know how I know, but I know." He smiles, patting her cheek lightly. "You have come far, much beyond my expectations." "You are pleased?" She looked so forlorn, staring up at him. He said sternly, "When you are well, I will be pleased. I am filled with admiration, however. You don't even question why. I trust you, Caradoc. I know there are some things that you do because you have reasons." He nods, waving to the purple lights. "There are. For your own sake, it's better you don't know." She is returned and found in the fetal position by Esther the next morning, as if she had never moved. Yet her makeup that had been left on had been removed, and her face had a shiny glow, and the satin gown is hardly creased. She tiptoes to her bedside, placing the flasks of coffee in a mug. "Mara, honey, your coffee." "Hurry. Robert Boyle is due any day now, and the devil's work is afoot." "I don't believe in the devil. Don't use nonsense." "What is it?" Mara moans. "Ian had to bury a dozen small animals last night. Strange goings on." A flare of anger in Esther's voice. "The horses," Mara said, horrified. Esther smirks. "Only the little creatures, my dear. All others appear well enough." Mara felt a bizarre picture forming in her mind. Alarmed, she yelled, "Quick, hurry, tell Ian to remove all animals to the furthest pasture for at least 3 weeks, or until we have a heavy rainfall. Under no circumstances may the dogs of any animals eat of the grass surrounding the south end of the castle below my room. Hurry, hurry, or they will die. Esther, not one to question the paranormal talents of her charge, ran out yelling for Geraldine to send Sophie to get Ian and gather all the tenants. She said, "We must build a fence 500 feet around the mistress of Glenhen's castle room. It might save more of the little creatures from dying. The grass in that area is contaminated. No one questions the reasons. They well knew the charm of Nalim-Traherne." She headed for the cliff. She sees a distant land where poppies once grew, lay the multitude few. Must we die? But no one heard her lonesome cry. And with their death, her grief, white tears falling, slowly drawing breath. They did not come right away. She remembers the early morning frost. It had spread across her window pane, weaving rich patterns, a magical web, creeping higher until it flames across the crown. When she looked again, against the rising sun, it was on fire and flames that careened across the wall and ceiling until it was as if the entire bedroom was on fire. Finally they arrived. She was near freezing. She was that cold. Once in this sphere, she felt warm as toast. "Yuck," Merrick screamed. "This is revolting." She jumped back from the laboratory glass enclosure. "What in thundering is this vile creature?" When Caradoc stopped laughing, as the light of others turned bright yellow, he explained. "Cro-Magnon species picked up last month, locked into suspended animation. But they were wiped out by the great flood of Noah." "Not true." "Why must I study these ancient creatures? If you do not understand all life, you cannot reconvert your own." "But what has a Cro-Magnon to do with me? They are dead." "Cro-Magnon, and you are wrong again. They withdrew in terror of the Homo sapiens we transferred from Mars." He pushed a button, and a map on the screen is revealed. He picked up a long stick and points. "This is the New World continent. Here is the future British Columbia of Canada. In this section there is a colony surviving quite nicely. And here is what will become the United States," pointing below in a great circle, then points to a central area. "This particular mountain region will never be adequately explored because of its remoteness, lack of minerals, and treacherous weather pattern. Jet streams become trapped, causing air disturbances, and their future planes can never penetrate it. However, a very large colony in this region still exists. It is the Colorado state of the future." "My goodness," she exclaimed, enthralled. He points back to the creature. "We took this one because it was dying and already 400 years old for study. They have no violence. They kill only to eat, but are otherwise vegetarian. They have never raped or murdered any human on Earth or each other." "And diseases?" Mara is now intrigued by the 13-feet-high gorilla-like monster. Caradoc nods, picking up her tone, and knows she feels ashamed at her earlier prejudices. "They have no high intelligence. We could not teach them to read or write or science. They're incapable of design analysis or build homes of rocks or tinder. They live in great caves in a communal lifestyle similar to wolves. Everyone has a share of duty and everyone is loved. Yet in morality they are superior to mankind in every way. Furthermore, through natural food, diet, and washing several times a day, they are disease-free and live 400 to 500 years. They do not breed beyond what they can manage comfortably, so each child is a member of the entire camp to raise, teach, and love." His tone of annoyance startled Mara. She proved to be a frustrating pupil when it came to zoology. She refused to study the insects under the microscope until he had to prevail upon her once more on her logical good sense. It was never going to be her favorite subject. She was stubborn, and it was difficult to force her into anything you had not convinced her was important material. She finally relinquished its merits, but retained, pointing to the chromagen. I still find this a vile, disgusting creature, although most notably kind, a very ugly being. Hurry and get this repugnant study done with. At that, she used the Yahweh's principle and would speed read through the course in record time. She has returned to the cliff as the sun is falling behind the ocean, and moonlight lit up the castle and forest. She galloped back, knowing she is quite safe. Esther had long since stopped chasing after her during this mysterious disappearances. Later that evening, during the exercise hour, naked of course, Tom snared to an equally naked Caradoc. She can be a bitch, but an admirable bitch. Caradoc grinned. Don't give me your sass, flexed his arms, shoulders, and touched his toes, stretching his long, sleek body. On his heels, the much shorter and more feminine Thomas made a mock bow, and snickered with a wimp. If I did not prefer you, I would certainly consider a sex change for her. As his king broke out laughing, Thomas went to the bars for stretch ballet as Caradoc lifted weights. They were joined in the whirlpool, ozonated and oxygenated with oxygen to purify and kill germs by the rest of the crew. The all-male crew were used to seeing each other nude. There were no reasons for prudishness here, and since celibacy was practiced for healing purposes, they made insinuating sexual banter towards each other for amusement. Laughing triggered negative ions and was part of their healing rituals. Caradoc, look here, Tom exclaimed, lifting his eyes from the lab monitor. What now? Something new on Mara's brain scan. Yes, pointing to the right side of her brain as she is left-handed. The right had the logistic side and the left the created hypnogenetic imagery analysis. See here, a slowly growing disorder caused by the toxic hydrocarbons that is damaging the right-sided brain cells. This poisoning induced by carbon monoxide metals, some drugs that the physicians use like morphine. I tried dopamine, but the side effects made her worse. What we need is an amphetamine. There is a plant in the jungle of South Central America. But, Caradoc smiles, let's leave her for 3 weeks and give her your theory a shot. Thomas beams as Caradoc gives a command to head for the equator region. Miranda had finally gotten permission to speak to Caradoc via the Amazoid satellite ship near Jupiter. She had finished the analysis that Thomas had beamed back. Most environmental chemicals that man produces, and many in their natural world, last indefinitely and therefore remain in the body long after the use or exposure ends. Many chemicals and drugs are absorbed and stored in their fat cells. Flush fasting will remove most, but not all. She stops, shows them several MRI photos. MRI scans had been improved to identify and list all toxins, and in color, reveals where they are stored in the brain. Then Miranda continues. Stored toxins can be released into body fluids during duress. Their organs malfunction because the cerebral brain signal reverses, and their signal is literally in self-destruct instead of healing as ours. What about opium, amphetamines, alcohol, antihistamines? All very dangerous. With small doses and limited use can be beneficial, but biochemical interactions are dangerous otherwise. Don't they build a tolerance over time? Tom asks. Not true. Because of genetic and biochemical accumulative effects, this theory is the opposite effect of recent technology. Further, we have the reason Atlantis failed. They showed a tolerance for about 30 years, then the system slowly breaks down and the self-destruction begins. They become physically addicted and can die from cardiac arrest and withdrawal. This means that what is true at birth is the opposite in middle life crisis. Be warned. No exact one diet works indefinitely. Because of their genetic differences. Caradoc quips, like snowflakes, each person is unique and beautiful, but all harbor holes in the brain. Tom laughs. Miranda nods and then adds, foreboding. Their insanity explodes as brain cells blow up by the hundreds, or perhaps thousands. You cannot cure this. If you cut off someone's arm, you may use an artificial limb, but you will never grow it back. Not the same. So you don't advise us to try this amphetamine on her? Absolutely not. Her condition is in early stages and can be controlled for 4 centuries henceforth. Then we can give her the analysis through telepathy. In the year 1986, when a doctor tries to murder, well, you may say then, and only then, force her rebirth to remember this, and then she must use the amphetamine sources. We show it will be developed under the name Obitrol in 1950, but it will never come to any benefit to mankind, as they never discover its potential use. Our telepathy indicates she will, or rather only after a doctor tries to murder her will she begin this process. That is all we can see for the moment. And that is only if we keep her genetic line alive. If she dies without children, the experiment, Caradoc stops. The horror of failure is too painful. Yes, Caradoc, she must bear children. We also show that she is stubborn, volatile, and will refuse to do so unless men rape her. That is not our problem. She broke off signaling Maranatha's signature, and her signal disappears. Damn it, Tom. Every time we get close, we get blocked at every turn. Tom was just as disappointed as his friend, saying, well, let's get back to work. Monitor picked up a new source of fuel. It is in the heart of the granite shield and holds the world's richest deposit. This area won't be developed for centuries. We will have a cache at Black Warrior River. Caradoc agreed, since it would be years developing Tom's new design, and the hidden cache would only last 500 years. The ship shot straight up faster than the speed of light. Then it veered into the northern wilderness, Iroquois territory, known for their bloodthirsty depravity. Perhaps the water is contaminated, triggering the violence. I know what you're thinking, Tom. Stop by the Colorado Spring to get a fresh supply first. The ship shot straight up, veered south, disappearing in a lush green valley where Cro-Magnons ignored their sudden intrusion. Tom is amazed. They are so gentle. He watches wolf puppies climb all over Cro-Magnon laps. Several Cro-Magnon children playfully wrestle with adults. Yes, pity they can't learn to read and write, Tom queries. Are there any Ormazidan dwarfs left thriving? Yes, in Nepal. Caradoc says, adding, but they do not remember their origin. Pity, Tom says, fascinated with the Cro-Magnon Valley and its peaceful serenity. The crew filled their water tanks, sucking it in with flexible white hoses. Then the ship shot straight up and disappeared into the clouds. End of chapter 2.